The winter of 1973 pressed down on New York City like a heavy frozen blanket. A sharp Atlantic wind whipped along Fifth Avenue, rattling the iron grates of shuttered storefronts and sending clouds of steam swirling from subway vents. Streetlights glowed pale yellow against the falling snow, each flake catching the light like a fleeting spark before dissolving on the blacktop. In the midst of that cold cityscape walked a young man in a camel-colored overcoat, his collar turned high against the biting air. His name was Donald John Trump, 27 years old and already carrying the restless energy of someone who believed tomorrow could always be bigger than today. Donald's footsteps echoed on the slick pavement as he made his way from a late meeting at a midtown construction site. Most of Manhattan had already surrendered to the night, but he liked to walk after long hours of negotiations. The cold sharpened his mind. The rhythm of his steps gave him time to think. He passed the glittering display windows of Bergdorf Goodman and the darkened lobby of the Plaza Hotel, mentally sketching possibilities for buildings he might one day own. Yet beneath the calculations of square footage and steel, there was something else stirring. An impatience, a need to prove that success meant more than numbers on a balance sheet. As he crossed 57th Street, a sudden gust carried a thin, strained sound to his ears, the muffled sob of someone crying. He slowed. The city was full of noise, sirens, taxis, late-night laughter, but this sound pierced through the winter wind with raw, human clarity. Donald scanned the sidewalk and noticed a small figure huddled in the recessed doorway of a closed bookstore. A young woman sat on the stone step, knees pulled to her chest, a threadbare coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Snow had gathered in her hair like a pale crown. For a moment, Donald hesitated. New York taught people to keep moving, to mind their own business, but something about the way she clutched a worn leather satchel, as though it held the last fragile pieces of her life, made him step closer. "Hey," he said gently, his voice carrying over the wind. "Are you all right?" The woman startled and looked up. Her eyes, startlingly blue even in the dim light, were swollen from tears. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her trembling hands betrayed the lie. Donald crouched to her level, careful not to startle her further. "It's freezing out here." "You'll get sick. Let me help you." She shook her head. "You can't." "No one can." Something inside him, some instinct stronger than the city's usual caution, refused to let him walk away. "My name's Donald," he said, offering a small smile. "What's yours?" A pause. "Claire," she whispered. "Claire," he repeated, as if anchoring the name in the night air. "Well, Claire, maybe I can't solve everything, but I can at least get you out of the cold. There's a diner around the corner. Bright lights, hot coffee." "What do you say?" Claire bit her lip, torn between pride and desperation. The wind howled down the street like an icy reminder of her vulnerability. Finally, she gave a faint nod. Donald stood and offered his gloved hand. She hesitated again, then placed her chilled fingers in his. He helped her to her feet and guided her through the swirling snow toward the warm glow of a 24-hour diner. Inside, the air smelled of strong coffee and fresh-baked pie. A jukebox played a soft Motown ballad, the sound almost startling after the street's winter silence. They slid into a corner booth. Claire sat stiffly, as if unsure whether to trust the comfort. Donald signaled the waitress and ordered 2 coffees and a slice of apple pie. "Extra warm," he said, catching the waitress's smile. When the mugs arrived, steam rising in gentle clouds, Donald wrapped his hands around his cup and studied the young woman across from him. Her coat was worn thin at the elbows, and her satchel bulged with papers, and what looked like sheet music. She avoided his gaze, staring instead at the swirling cream in her coffee. "So," Donald said softly, "want to tell me what brought you to a bookstore doorway at midnight in the middle of a snowstorm?" Claire took a shaky breath. I came to the city to study music. Juilliard. But the scholarship fell through. My landlord changed the locks this morning because I'm behind on rent. I don't have family here. I tried to call a friend in Boston, but—" Her voice broke. "I guess I thought I could just figure something out before morning." Donald felt a surge of protectiveness, surprising even himself. He knew the brutal calculus of New York real estate, the way the city could chew up dreamers and spit them out without mercy. "That's rough," he said quietly, "but you're not alone tonight. We'll figure something out." Claire looked up, startled by the certainty in his voice. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Donald shrugged, a faint smile playing at the edges of his mouth. "Maybe because somebody once gave me a chance when I needed it. And maybe because I think music matters, and the world shouldn't lose a voice like yours to a landlord's lock." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they shone with something other than despair. Hope, fragile but unmistakable, flickered like the neon sign outside the diner window. The diner's warmth settled over them like a soft blanket. Outside, snowflakes hurled themselves against the glass, but inside there was only the clatter of dishes and the low murmur of late-night patrons. Donald watched as color slowly returned to Claire's cheeks. She was young, 20, maybe 21, but there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself, despite the worn coat and trembling hands. When the waitress returned with the pie, Donald slid the plate toward her. "Eat," he said. "It'll help." Claire hesitated for only a second before picking up the fork. The first bite seemed to melt the tension from her shoulders. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Donald let the silence stretch, sensing that Claire needed time to gather her thoughts. Finally, she said, "I don't want to be anyone's charity case. I'll find a way to pay you back." Donald leaned back, studying her. "This isn't charity," he said evenly. "It's just people helping people. That's how it should work." She looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to decipher his motive. "You're different," she said finally. He smiled faintly. "Different how?" "Most men would have walked past. Or worse." Donald shrugged. "Maybe I don't like walking past things that matter." Her lips curved in a tentative smile. It was small but real, like a light flickering to life in a long dark room. They talked then about music, about the city, about the tiny apartment she'd lost, and the piano she missed more than anything. Donald listened, genuinely listened, asking questions about composers and favorite pieces. Claire spoke of Chopin nocturnes and Gershwin's restless rhythms, her hands moving unconsciously as if playing invisible keys on the table. Her passion was contagious. Even Donald, whose world revolved around steel and blueprints, felt the music in her words. When the conversation finally lulled, he checked his watch. It was past 2 in the morning. "You can't go back out there," he said. "It's too cold, and the train's slow after midnight." "I can't stay here forever," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Donald thought for a moment. "I have a building under renovation on the west side," he said. "It's mostly empty, but there's a security office with heat and a couch. You'd be safe there for the night." Claire blinked. "You'd let me stay in one of your buildings?" "Of course. I'll call the guard. You'll have privacy and a warm place to sleep. Tomorrow we figure out something better." She looked torn between gratitude and suspicion. Why would you do that for me? Donald met her gaze steadily. Because you deserve a chance to fight another day. And because I can. Something in his tone, calm, confident, without a trace of pity, eased her doubts. She nodded slowly. Okay. Just for tonight. Donald left a generous tip on the table and led her back into the night. Snow crunched beneath their feet as they walked to the corner, where a black sedan waited. He opened the door and motioned for her to climb in. The driver, a middle-aged man in a wool cap, looked back in surprise but said nothing when Donald gave the address. The car glided through the empty streets, passing rows of darkened brownstones and glowing traffic lights. Claire stared out the window at the falling snow, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. "You really own all these buildings?" she asked quietly. "Not all," Donald said with a small grin. "Not yet." She laughed, the sound like a sudden burst of music in the hushed car. "You're ambitious." "Ambition is just another word for believing tomorrow can be bigger than today," he replied. They reached the construction site, an old hotel being converted into apartments. Donald led her through a side entrance where a security guard greeted him with a nod. The guard's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Claire, but he said nothing as Donald explained the arrangement. Inside, the warmth of the security office was almost shocking after the night air. Donald found a clean blanket in a supply closet and draped it over the couch. Claire touched the fabric as if it were made of gold. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You already have," Donald replied. "You trusted me." She hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him. A quick, almost shy embrace that left a surprising warmth on his chest. "Good night, Donald," she whispered. "Good night, Claire. Sleep well." He left her there, safe and warm, the image of her blue eyes lingering in his mind as he stepped back into the swirling snow.
The next morning dawned pale and gray, the city wrapped in a hushed blanket of fresh snow. Donald returned to the building with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag of pastries from a nearby bakery. Claire sat on the couch, hair slightly mussed, but eyes brighter than the night before. "You came back," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "I said we'd figure something out," Donald replied, handing her the coffee. "I keep my word." As she sipped the hot drink, Donald laid out a plan. He knew a building superintendent with a vacant unit that needed light repairs. If Claire was willing to help with some cleaning and minor tasks, she could stay there rent-free for a few months. It wasn't glamorous, but it would give her stability and time to reapply for scholarships or find part-time work. Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't even know me," she said again, voice trembling. "I know enough," Donald said gently. "I know you're worth helping." They spent the morning arranging details, Donald making calls and Claire listening in quiet disbelief as doors she thought closed forever began to open. By noon, she had a key in her pocket and a future she could touch. Before they parted, Claire took his hand. "Someday," she said, "I'll play for you. A real concert, and when I do, you'll know you helped make it possible." Donald squeezed her hand. "I'll be there," he promised. Donald Trump had always been a man who thrived in the eye of the storm, yet as he sat in the quiet lounge of the Midtown Hotel later that night, the chaos of the city beyond the glass windows felt strangely distant. He replayed the encounter with Emily over and over in his mind. It wasn't the kind of meeting that usually stuck with him. After all, he met hundreds of people every week, shook countless hands, heard endless pleas for help. But something about the girl's trembling voice, the way her eyes clung to hope even as the world around her seemed to crumble, refused to fade. It wasn't charity that drove him. Trump had never been comfortable with the idea of pity. What struck him was Emily's tenacity. He saw in her a reflection of the young man he had once been, the son of a Queens builder, hungry to prove himself to a city that didn't care who you were unless you forced it to notice. He remembered the long nights in his father's office, poring over blueprints, figuring out how to make the numbers work when the margins were razor thin. He remembered the sting of rejection from banks and developers who dismissed him as just another loud-mouthed kid with a dream too big for his pocket. People think success is luck, Trump murmured to himself, his reflection staring back at him in the darkened window. They don't see the nights you don't sleep. The next morning, he didn't wait for his secretary to arrange a meeting or his lawyers to draft contracts. He picked up the phone and called Emily directly, a gesture that startled her so much she nearly dropped the receiver. "Emily, it's Donald," he said, his voice brisk but warm. "I've been thinking about you. I don't want to just hand you a check. I want to build something with you." The plan was bold, almost reckless. Trump proposed turning Emily's modest vision, a small bakery, into something far larger, a flagship cafe inside one of his midtown properties, a space that would showcase not just her pastries, but her story. "People love authenticity," he told her. "They love a fighter. You've got both. Let's give them a reason to root for you." Emily's heart raced. "But I don't have the money, the staff." "That's what partnerships are for," Trump interrupted. "You bring the heart. I'll bring the muscle." In the weeks that followed, Trump became a force of nature in Emily's life. He walked her through lease negotiations, introduced her to suppliers, and even tasted her recipes himself, offering candid critiques in the way only he could. "Too sweet," he'd say of one cake, waving his hand dismissively before flashing a grin. "But it's got potential. Just like you." The press got wind of the unlikely alliance and descended like hawks. Headlines splashed across tabloids. "Real estate tycoon backs unknown baker. Trump bets on grit, not glamour." Pundits speculated about his motives. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others whispered about political ambition. Trump ignored them all. "Let them talk," he told Emily. "Noise is free advertising." Opening day arrived on a crisp autumn morning. A crowd gathered outside the glass doors of Emily's Rising, the name Trump himself had suggested. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. Reporters jockeyed for position as camera flashes lit the room. Emily, dressed in a simple cream dress, stood beside Trump as he cut the ribbon with his signature flourish. "This isn't about business," Trump said to the assembled crowd. "It's about belief. Belief in hard work, in second chances, in the idea that anyone can rise if they refuse to quit." The cafe was an instant sensation. Lines wrapped around the block. Socialites sipped coffee next to construction workers. Critics praised the pastries as much as the story behind them. Emily worked from dawn till midnight, her hands dusted with flour, her eyes shining with the pride of someone who had built something lasting. For Trump, the project was more than a financial venture. It was a reminder of the power of individual action. One decision, a phone call, an offer of partnership, had changed the trajectory of a young woman's life. In a world obsessed with grand gestures and sweeping policies, here was proof that sometimes the most meaningful victories were personal and immediate. Months later, as Emily's Rising expanded to a second location, an elderly man approached Trump during a quiet visit to the cafe. He wore a veteran's cap and moved with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who had seen both war and peace. "Mr. Trump," the man said, extending a weathered hand, "I just wanted to thank you. My granddaughter got her first job here. This place gave her confidence. It gave her hope." Trump shook his hand firmly. "That's what America's about." He replied. Opportunity. Nobody hands it to you. You have to grab it. But sometimes you just need someone to open the door. As he left the cafe that day, the city skyline glowing in the fading light, Trump felt a rare quiet settle over him. Deals came and went, buildings rose and fell. But the look in Emily's eyes and the gratitude of strangers whose lives had been touched by a simple act of belief reminded him that legacy wasn't measured in square footage or net worth, but in the lives you lift along the way.